Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I feel like I have a lot of friends in Rotary, so it's particularly nice to be with you all. I was asked to talk about downtown revitalization, and for me, really, that comes down to Whiskey Row. So I want to give you a little bit of history first. Actually, should I introduce my guests? Let me just say, I've got my support team here with me, aside from all this support team, and I want to introduce a few of my guests. Ellen Call, Sissy Musselman, Leslie Danahy, my very beloved brother, Stephen Jones, and the newest member of our family, Jonathan Ruckman, who just married my niece in June and is now working at Catholic Charities. Okay, so I want to talk about a little bit of history before we talk about what's happened more recently on the block. This is Whiskey Row. It is a collection of buildings, cast iron fronts, that were built roughly between the 1850s and the 1890s. Now, there was a lot of activity on this block before then, but some of those buildings have burned to the ground. Some of the buildings on the block were designed by some of Louisville's most famous Victorian architects. Andre Wartha, who also designed City Hall, Henry Whitestone, who designed the Peter Dumeniel House and the Brennan House and some other important houses in Louisville, and D.X. Murphy, who also designed the building that Heaven Hill owns that they're about to turn into the Evan Williams Experience. So this is a very important block architecturally. It's also a very important block commercially. It's here, and it's known as Whiskey Row, was known as Whiskey Row back 150 years ago, because it was largely used by the local distillers, including some very famous ones, J.T.S. Brown and Sons, Brown Forman, the Weller, the precursor to Weller Stitzel. It was used by those companies to store their whiskey barrels in preparation for taking them 2 blocks down to the wharf and putting them on steamships. Before the McAlpin locks were built, this was a very important part of Louisville's commerce. So all of that's interesting, more or less, depending on your, perspective. But really, that has not a lot to do with my interest in Whiskey Row. My interest in Whiskey Row goes back. This is a beautiful this is an old photograph from the 1930s and 1940s. Another view of what it looked like. My interest in Whiskey Row goes back to when I was 11 years old, and my father started sawing me in half in the basement. My dad was Larry Jones. He was a respectable corporate attorney, a partner in the Wyatt firm by day. At night and on the weekends, he was a dedicated magician, sleight of hand and illusions. This is my family. In the basement of our family home, that's my dad standing up. He has just put my mother into a trance and levitated her. That's my brother Larry Jones, who is also a very respectable pediatrician in town. His lower torso is missing. His upper torso is perched on the coffee table. I actually appear in 2 places in the photograph, one side on the left, one side on the right. I have been sawed in half, and obviously the operation to put me back was successful. And my other younger brother, second brother, is Mark, and he's an attorney. He's up in a drum. A moment before this picture was shot, it was completely empty, and he just materialized into it. Most importantly, my brother Stephen, who actually had the original idea to do Whiskey Row Lofts, please stand, Stephen, is present in the photograph. Our mother is pregnant in this shot, and Stephen's in the womb. So here's what I can say, that magic is literally in our blood. It is in the blood of all of my brothers and sisters. We grew up with magic from literally before we were born. And my father performed regularly with us in the show, in the basement. And then at some point he decided he wanted to perform for the public, and that just wasn't easy to do in the basement of the family home. So he started looking around for a building where he could build a magic theater, a custom-designed magic theater that actually Norm Berry helped him design. And he found the building at the corner of 2nd and Main Street. This is the original headquarters for the L&N Railroad Company. It was built in the 1870s. It is gorgeous inside, and this because it was a corporate headquarters for the railroad in the robber baron age. They used it for their executive offices, their passenger ticket offices, and their freight ticket offices were all located in here. Prior to that, it was the site of the original Galt House. This is the picture of the original Galt House. It was built in 1834. Unfortunately, it burned to the ground in January of 1865, and that is what created the ability for the L&N Railroad to come in and buy the property. So my father bought the building. Let's see, got my pages a little out of order. Excuse me 1 second. Okay. One other thing I wanted to say about the Galt House, the original Galt House. It was the site, Charles Dickens, it was very famous. It was the premier hotel in Louisville at the time. It was where the Union generals met during the Civil War to plot their strategy, including a very important famous meeting between Ulysses S. Grant and William Tecumseh Sherman to plan the Battle for Atlanta and the March to the Sea. That took place in that old building. Anyway, by 1984, it was mostly vacant, and that's when our father bought it. He and a partner, an entrepreneur who used to be in this community, Henry Porter, some of you all might remember him, he bought the building, and there, with the idea of redeveloping the whole building, but their dad created Squirrely's Magic Tea Room, and he performed magic with a vaudeville twist from about 1986 until 2001. This is Dad in his squirrely persona. And Stephen was his magic assistant. So Dad and Henry worked to acquire as many buildings on this block as possible. Their vision, actually, was to renovate the entire block. This is in the mid-1980s. They intended to renovate it as mixed-use, 24/7 community with retail and restaurants and live entertainment on the ground floors, of offices and apartments and condominiums above. So they had the right idea, but they were a good 20 years ahead of time. And here's why they were ahead of their time. This is an aerial from the mid-1980s. This is pre-Humana Waterside, pre-Presbyterian Church, pre-Belknap Park, and very importantly, pre-Waterfront Park. This is what the waterfront looked like in the mid-1980s, and I remember going with my dad to Washington to talk to some large urban developers who said, great idea, no way. The infrastructure is not there, and for me, one of the lessons in this is that when the public sector leads with infrastructure and amenities, it really does incentivize private investment, because that's why my father and Henry really couldn't see through their vision back in the 1980s. So in 2003, Dad died. And about a year later, Stephen called me, because really this all goes back to Stephen. Stephen called me and said, the writing is on the wall. This building is going to be sold, and we will lose Squirrely's Magic Tea Room forever unless we step in. So we did. We bought out Dad's partner, Henry, and then we proceeded to spend the next 4 years trying to purchase the building next door. The building next door is shown here with the red painted cast iron front. It was the Berwick-Hendershot building, and they were running a perfectly successful dry goods distributing company. They didn't really want to sell their building. So it took us 4 years. I came back to Louisville about every 2 months. We started working with Bill Whalen, City Properties Group, to come up with ideas about what to do. We finally, in early 2008, we got a contract. And in June of 2008, I moved back from North Carolina, largely in order to redevelop what was going to become Whiskey Row Lofts. 2008 was kind of an important year for all of you finance people, right? So I moved back here in June of 2008. There's good news. In August of 2008, thank you, Sissy Musselman, the Arena Authority successfully sells its bonds and announces a date for construction. That's the good news. The bad news was that a month later, in September of 2008, Lehman Brothers collapsed. The financial markets hit the skids, and we went into a long, very steep slide. It was really a bad time. Commercial lending basically dried up. And I had just gotten my baby brother and myself into the deepest financial hole of our lives. We borrowed money personally to purchase that building. So we needed to find, there was only one way out, that was to find construction financing of $15 million and to find it fast. Eventually, it worked. We got Doc Crow and Solis Tekis to sign commercial leases. Stockyards Bank, who will forever be close to my heart, stepped up with very substantial loan and tax credit financing. And it worked. This is the view from Washington Street. These buildings all go from Main Street to Washington Street. This is the corner of Washington and 2nd. We have 120,000 square feet of historic renovated space, plus a little bit of new construction you can see over there on the top. We have 36 residential apartments, many of them with 9-foot-high ceilings, original hardwood floors, some with terraces and rooftop terraces and balconies, very unusual for an historic renovation in downtown. This is part of the City Properties Group brilliant architecture. We have 5 restaurants, including Doc Crow's, Solis Tekis, Beer Nose by the Bridge, the Troll Pub, and in April we will have our 5th restaurant open called Sidebar, and it will be located at the window right behind the Troll Pub entrance on 2nd Street. We also have 3 special event spaces, including the Georgian Suite, which is named after an old railroad line of the L&N Railroad, 5 rooms that connect together. We have the gallery, which you see, I guess things on your left, and we have preserved a 5-foot-tall carved walnut staircase that is original to the building, along with the tile floor that you can see there that's also original to the building. These are from the 1870s. We have also brought life and fun back to Washington Street, and I want to just say this does not reflect my affiliation. It's just the best shot that I had. Yesterday I gave this talk and I had on a red jacket. It was a little easier to explain. Anyway, and meanwhile, Tommy O'Shea was also creating a great pub, a 3-story pub next door to us. Most importantly, from Stephen and my perspective, what got this thing started in the first place, we have brought back the theater. It's now been renamed Barron's Theater, and it's got our father's original magic lithographs in it. It's the site of weddings, believe it or not, corporate meetings, theater performances, magic performances. I think that's a famous attorney there in that shot. And a few other famous people as well. This is the inaugural event for the Magic Theater. And in this June, this summer, June 14th, 15th, and 16th, it's going to be Magic Central. There's going to be a 3-day magic festival. 20% of the proceeds actually go to benefit COSAIR, and it's being put on by world-class magicians, the kind of magic Louisville does not see. Tickets are on sale now at that website. You might want to grab some. It is really going to be fantastic. So that's one thing. The second thing is Main Street, the rest of Whiskey Row, 111 through 119 West Main Street, 5 buildings in the middle of the block. While we were renovating Whiskey Row lofts, these buildings had their roofs missing and they were deteriorating badly. 2011, a group of civic-minded investors came together and decided to buy them. The expectation was that we could save them. The expectation was not that this was a great economic investment. They really had a civic and philanthropic incentive. The ownership structure was so creative that it was written up in the Wall Street Journal. What did these investors, now known as Main Street Revitalization, buy? They bought facades, 5 buildings, goes all the way through to West Main Street. What they really bought was an enormous amount of deterioration. The brick walls were bowed. That window in the middle of the shot is popping out because the wall has moved and is bowed. We had a tree at the top of the shot. That tree is growing out of the 4th floor of the building. We had interior collapses, very significant interior collapses. This is not light coming from the windows. That's light at the back coming from collapses in the middle of the building. We had mold. We had huge old timbers that were literally dripping in the sub-basement, dripping wood. They had been so perpetually waterlogged. We knew these buildings were in bad shape, but honestly, we didn't know how bad off they were. The short version of a very painful long story is that we had a structural engineer from Boston. This was such a dangerous job. We had a structural engineer from Boston come and design the stabilization plan. We had originally had a bid for $1.5 million. An estimate of $1.5 million. The low bid came in at 3 times that. We had a whole mess of lemons on our hands. So we knew we were going to have to find a new creative strategy, and we decided that we would have to make a whiskey sour out of those lemons. So we have to hurry along here. We went to the National Trust for Historic Preservation. They came to town for 2 days. They helped us create a model for a new financing strategy called the Louisville Preservation Fund that will put money into Whiskey Row, cycle it out of Whiskey Row, and be a vehicle to create a financing mechanism for the long term. The mayor and Jim King got behind this. Christy Brown pledged $1 million if Metro would match that $1 million, and Jim King and the mayor said that they would. So based on that pledge, because the buildings were coming down, we went ahead. We've stabilized those 5 buildings. There are 2 additional buildings where the buildings have come down at the back, but we have stabilized the facades. We have stabilized them on the back of Washington Street all the way through, so we have reopened Washington Street, which was closed not because of our construction, but because of the condition of the buildings. We have shored up the insides. We have created temporary roofs. We have salvaged 100 pallets of bricks, enormous numbers of windows, doors, cast-down elements, anything of value. And we have found some surprises. You all may have heard of the S&M Club that we found in the basement, which was interesting. None of us knew about it. But we also found good things. We found tin ceilings, original staircases, and beautiful multi-storied skylights that we can use to put light back into the middle of these dark, long buildings. So what's next? We are in the process of talking to some very fun, interesting, food and whiskey-oriented users. We expect all of Main Street and all of Washington Street to be entertainment-oriented, to be a tourist destination, and to get all of you back on the block. We will have offices above, apartments, layers of apartments above that, and we're in the process of putting the financing together as well. We are creating the Louisville Preservation Fund. It's a new nonprofit. It will probably be chartered in April of this year. It will create a permanent financing vehicle for historic preservation for Louisville, not just for downtown, but for Louisville, for the foreseeable future. It is very creative. It's why National Trust for Historic Preservation came to town. It doesn't exist in this form anywhere else. It will be a new model, and we will be developing a strategic focus. So, this is my last slide. So how did an early part in a family magic show turn into a late life career saving a bunch of old buildings on one block in Louisville? Here's what I learned from my dad. Appearances can be completely deceiving. Passion and vision and determination can overcome almost any obstacle. And most importantly to me, imagination is what determines the limit of possibility. Thank you so much.